I just love the idea that like bread is a balm as a salve.
Yeah, and that these bakers, the first thing they're doing after they're feeling an earthquake is getting ready for people to come in and buy bags of bread to bring back to their friends and family. Someone out there is like shaking a building back and forth to get people to come into their bakery.
Crazy marketing tactic.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Aliza Abarbanel. Zine is an independent literary food magazine co-founded by pastry chef Tanya Bush and me, taste contributing editor Aliza Abarbanel. Our newest issue, Daily Bread, explores how bread impacts our lives through ritual, religion, and routine. Today on the show, I invited Tanya into the studio to talk about the editorial process behind our 6th issue and the many cultural meanings baked into bread. Tanya Bush, this is Taste, ex-Zine again. Thank you for coming back on the podcast.
Here we are.
Back in the dark room with no windows.
I love it here.
I was just saying that I listened to our Candyland episode, which was about the previous issue of Zine in preparation for having you back on. And we were truly like on a sugar high talking about candy. It was so much fun.
I know. Were we eating candy as we were podcasting?
It would have been a fun move, but I don't think we were. I think we were just so excited to talk about like Warheads and Reese's and all of those things.
Yeah, we had like divisive opinions on candy, I feel.
Well, we're back to talk about bread, which I feel like off the jump is maybe not as much fun. This episode's going to be amazing.
Fun. This episode is going to be so good. Please keep listening.
But I think bread is a more like steadfast, serious, staple topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this issue actually is quite a fun issue, and I'm excited to talk about the different components. But I think it's interesting for us to come to bread as a subject. And I guess to start, the theme of this issue is called Daily Bread. It's about bread and ritual and routine and sometimes religion. And I'm curious for you if you have any kind of daily bread routine.
I do have daily bread routines. I love bread, as I think you probably know. I'm like carb forward.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't love bread? The perfect carb. I do toast most mornings. That's like my breakfast of choice. So I'll do like peanut butter and honey on sourdough, or like just butter and salt when I'm feeling something more savory. Honestly, recently I've been doing cinnamon toast, which is something I grew up with, which is like butter blitzed with like cinnamon sugar and then a little salt, and then you just like slather that on a slice, and it's so good and indulgent and delicious.
That sounds really good. So you're mixing the cinnamon in with the butter ahead of time?
I mean, you don't have to. That's sort of like the elite version. My mom was absolutely not doing that. She was just like
shaking it on.
Yeah, basically like shaking on like a mix of like white sugar, domino sugar, and cinnamon. And then I don't even think she was doing salt. But like it was, like dessert for breakfast, but sanctioned by the parental authorities.
Okay, so I have to ask what bread is being used for the toast in all of these forms.
Good question. Well, I'm currently in disgrace at the co-op, so I'm technically not allowed in there. But ordinarily, I get the L'Impremier like sourdough batard because they sell it at the co-op. I'm 5 shifts deep. It's pretty bad.
Hey, I'm aghast right now because Tanya and I talk every day, and you have not once mentioned to me that you are now on the naughty list of the Park Slope Food Co-op.
Girl, I'm in dire straits over there. I'm literally like, they should have my picture on the walls. Like, I've used up all my passes.
Have you tried bribing them with baked goods?
I don't think it's gonna work.
No,
they're czars over there. Yeah.
Okay, so now that you don't have access to this bread, what are you doing?
What am I doing? Great question. I do the Lost Bread Co. milk bread from the farmer's market is generally my loaf of choice, but also I'll just I'll get like the packaged white bread that I grew up with. Honestly, I'm not averse to it, but I do of course prefer like an artisanal sourdough when the moment is right.
When you're allowed.
When I'm allowed, yeah.
I also eat toast for breakfast most days. Some days I'll do
What's your toast?
The yogurt vibe. Toast, peanut butter, and jelly on toast.
Oh, jelly? Really?
Well, is there a difference between jelly and jam?
Yes, and I should know the answer. There is. I mean, jelly is more gelatinous and it has less of the actual whole fruit in it.
Okay, so I do jam. I get normally my bread from the Fort Greene Farmers Market. I get the She-Wolf sourdough, batard, or the Pullman, which is like what I imagine cartoon toast to look like. It's that perfect square. And I like to buy it just for the aesthetics, but it is a much bigger loaf. So it's kind of like I have to freeze more of it at once. And then I do peanut butter, and right now I have raspberry jam, Bon Maman, obviously, the best jam option, flaky salt on top. That's it. And I could honestly have that every day of my life.
And do you cut off the crusts or do you eat the crusts?
I eat the crusts.
Oh, okay. She's aghast.
Well, I know where you're going with this line of questioning because there's a great story in Cake Zine. It's called Crust. That's about cutting off the crusts as like a symbol of class and as a love language. So I think that's a valid question. But I think to go to the lengths to buy a sourdough loaf, which I think a lot of their prize status comes from the burnished crust, and then to cut the crust off would just be like, you might as well just go to the grocery store and get the classic wrapped white bread and cut
You're
the crust
desecrating
off.
the bread by taking off the crust. I mean, I'm not above it, I have got to say. Like, I was thinking in advance of this podcast about how when I was a kid, I would like hollow out the insides of the loaf for like the soft sort of like the like fluffy innards. And that was my favorite part, you know? And I was like, I don't want crust.
You were gutting the bread.
I was gutting the bread. I was eviscerating the bread.
Okay, so this is our daily bread habits as eaters, but you are also a pastry chef at Little Egg in Prospect Heights, which does not necessarily have like a sourdough bread program, but I'm curious, like as a baker, what's your relationship like with bread?
Yeah, I mean, I bake some bread. I don't do like loaves for the restaurant because we don't have like production capacity for that. But I'll do like, we have brioche buns on the menu, and I'll do like a milk bread here and there. I love enriched doughs, which is like what a brioche is, obviously. But I don't really think that I have like the production capacity or expertise to be like producing like larger scale. And obviously there are just so many amazing bread bakers in the city who we source from. We have ACQ milk bread on the menu, which is some of the best in the city, and I'd rather be eating Tyler's loaf than my own.
Yeah, I'm curious if you think that bread bakers are a specific contingent or personality in the larger ecosystem of bakers.
Definitely. I think there's a distinction to be made between bread bakers and pastry chefs. I think, like, to me, bread baking is more like physically taxing. Like, I think about sort of like mixing and dividing and shaping and like hoisting these like massive burnished loaves into and out of like a large oven. And like the hours are earlier, you're sort of like at the mercy of the loaf, which is interesting because it's like obviously technically simpler ingredients, right? It's like, flour, water, yeast if you're using commercial leavener versus like, a sourdough starter or something like that. But, it's really like technically demanding. And I feel like, bakers and bread bakers specifically have this like reciprocal, almost like erotic relationship with their doughs. And to me, that like they just sort of feel like, that I can bake bread, but like that they're sort of different classes of the pastry world. And, of course, as you were sort of saying, bread like evokes sustenance and like it's this sort of staple item, whereas like pastry is often thought of as like frivolous and like it's not a necessity. It's sort of the opposite of that. It's a luxury. So they do feel to me like sort of distinct classes.
Yeah. Something I was thinking about while preparing to talk with you today also was this idea that I think bread is a baked item that is then further transformed by customers often in a way that other things are not. Like you wouldn't buy, maybe you would buy a cookie at the bakery and then turn it into an ice cream sandwich, but you wouldn't like take a cake home and then do something else to it in the same way that if we're talking about bread as like a loaf of sandwich bread versus like a morning bun or something like that. Like the bread is the jumping off point and then it's taken home and it's turned into a toast or a sandwich or something else. It kind of is like this ingredient still.
Yeah, totally. 100%. People want to customize it. They're toasting it. They're griddling it. They're using it as sort of like the mechanism through which to like shovel their eggs into their mouth, as opposed to like a pastry, which is sort of like complete in its own way.
It's the final product.
It's the final product, exactly.
Yeah, and it's funny for us because when we were setting out to do a bread issue, I think there were so many directions in which we could have taken it. And we certainly received a lot of very interesting pitches about sandwiches or toast or things like that. But they didn't really make it into the final magazine, I think in part because we felt like there was so much to engage in bread itself before it's being transformed. Maybe there's a sandwich issue or something
down
in the
line.
future. Yeah. But when we were kind of setting off to embark on this bread journey, like how were you thinking about like what a bread issue for Cake Zine might contain?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We're always sort of interrogating like the definition of like bread versus pie versus cake
Yeah, do you
versus
remember our debate over whether or not chewing gum is a candy?
Oh my God, yeah. But where did we land?
Well, I said no because you can't ingest
Ingest it,
it, but
yeah.
then Wikipedia included it in the definition of candy, which was kind of a betrayal for me.
I still think it's kind of a candy.
I think we said if it was sugary enough, it was a
It
candy.
was a candy, yeah. For bread, there's so many different like iterations of it, you know? Like we have an entire cast of characters at the front of the book with like where we're naming all of the various breads that are a part of the issue. And there's, some of the like classic players like focaccia and challah, but then there's like, the Eucharist and like anadama loaf and like, banana bread and like these things that like we might not traditionally consider or think about when we think of like, the Platonic ideal of a white like sort of sliced loaf of bread, And to me, I think, like, as always, we, like, delight in subversions of theme when we're putting together an issue. So, like, phrases that felt, like, proximate to bread, such as, like, getting this bread, as in, like, going out and getting the bag or, loafing about or, even, like, the wheat and Catan. Like, all of them are, like, close to bread and in dialogue with it, but are not actually about, like, a physical loaf in the way that, like, one might think about. But yeah, I think the question came up specifically around sandwiches, and we were
We wanted to save it.
we wanted to save it. I think, yeah,
Yeah, but I like what you're calling out about. I think we definitely have a soft spot for kind of playing around with language and specifically these kind of companion pieces that we ended up running in this issue. One of them is about like Sahir Ahmed writing about getting this bread and New York hustle culture and the bacon, egg, and cheese on a Kaiser roll or whatever roll that you get at the bodega that's kind of fueling the economic ecosystem of the city. And then that's run next to this piece by Adam Spiegelman, which is like an ode to the joy of loafing around and doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And, that one, I think even the connection to bread is more tenuous. It's this idea of to loaf and loafdom. But I think
Allow yourself to proof.
Oh, yeah.
To give yourself the time to relax and enjoy and indulge.
To let the strands of gluten in your soul relax before they get like torn apart and puffed up again. Where are we going with this metaphor?
That's poetry. I mean, to me, one of the things I was thinking about was like, we didn't actually include like really any quick breads in the issue. There's like a passing reference to like a banana bread, I believe. But like, I think it's interesting to think about like, just because it has bread in the name, does that actually constitute bread?
Right, exactly. I mean, we have a lot of flatbread in this issue, which I think we were thinking about bread as the kind of like staple carb item and how it's used in different contexts. And I think flatbread felt very much like within that tradition. So it made sense for us to include. There also is a whole kind of ode to the Uncrustable, which sent you off on a whole Uncrustable journey recently.
It really did. I really wanted to make my own version. And it proved much harder than anticipated. Like, I was like, how does one do this? I found this mold on the internet that promised to give me like immaculate crusts or like lack of crusts and like sealing. And it just was ineffectual. It like fully didn't work. And I had made a loaf of brioche and was like just left with this like crazy tangled mass of like peanut butter and jam that looked terrible. And I was like, okay, like let's just leave this to the professionals. Like Smucker's has got it.
Yeah, maybe let's take a step back. Like what story led you to want to try to replicate an Uncrustable in the first place?
Well, Michael Denzel Smith, who's a writer who I admire a lot, has this piece about sort of like class consciousness in the context of like bread. And he writes about how he's newly a father, and his daughter has these sort of like bourgeois iterations of the classic peanut butter and jelly, and she has like almond butter, and it's on like sprouted 10-grain bread, and it's like, like a mango raspberry jam. And he's sort of like contrasting that and interrogating that in the context of his own childhood, where his mother would, as a sort of act of love, cut off the crusts of bread for him, and his father, who had come from like a world in which eating every part of the bread was important, that he grew up on sugar sandwiches, found this sort of like antithetical to his sense of like purpose. And he was like the actual breadwinner in the context of the family. And so I think it's a really like beautiful and interesting piece about sort of like intergenerational class, and also like what one thinks about when they're sort of like zooming in on like an everyday household item like PB&J, which is such a like staple snack. And it's actually sort of, much richer than one might think and emblematic of all of these different sort of like class and history elements.
Yeah, and I really like this idea of how the lack of something actually makes something more valuable. So the lack of crust on a tea sandwich at a British high tea, or the lack of crust on a sandwich for a child that's getting packed in their lunchbox, is what makes it more special or more of status in that kind of way.
Right, because you are choosing to like bypass the nutritional value. It doesn't matter to you whether you consume the entire thing or not. And you think about also all of the waste that goes into like a Uncrustable. I'm like thinking, I'm like, where does that crust go? Where are the crusts? What do they do with them?
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to call some people at Smucker's and
let's find out.
This reminds me of another story in the issue that was kind of asking these questions about bread that I had never thought about before, which was the bread clip story, which is the first piece in this issue, which is talking about, it's called Consider the Bread Clip. It's talking about how the bread clip was created, these factories that produce them today, how they've kind of spun off to now be used to fasten all kinds of things in addition to bread bags, such as wiffle ball bags, etc. So the bread clip is now collected online by this niche group of people called HORG, aka the Holotypic Occlupanid Research Group, which occlupanid is the kind of pseudo-Latin scientific name they've created for a bread clip closure. And there's this kind of joy and delight that people have in uploading these niche, hard-to-find bread clips in the same manner that you would have an insect displayed, like identified and labeled in different ways. And they're all looking to find their own. And what I really love about that story is just how it's drawing so much attention to something that I think a lot of people use on a daily basis but have never really considered.
I'm Nomi Fry.
I'm Vincent Cunningham.
I'm Alex Schwartz, and we are Critics at Large, a podcast from The New Yorker. Guys, what do we do on the show every week?
We look into the startling maw of our culture and try to figure something out.
That's right. We take something that's going on in the culture now. Maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a book, maybe it's just kind of a trend.
And we expand it across culture as kind of a pattern or a template.
Join us on Critics at Large from The New Yorker. New episodes drop every Thursday. Follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Totally.
Are there any other stories in the issue that are kind of pet favorites for you, at least right now in this moment in time?
Good question. I mean, I love Jordan Kistner's sort of like gluten schism story. She writes about this church upstate, this Catholic church that sort of, there's this like...
This is a true story.
True story, by the way, yeah. Get her on Normal Gossip. She writes about this like church upstate that has this like wild debacle around whether or not like the host can be gluten-free, and there's,
meaning like the Eucharist.
The Eucharist, exactly, yeah. Jesus's body. And, the official line from the Catholic Church and from the Pope is, Jesus's body must contain gluten. And this sort of like more conservative, what's the word, priest?
What's the word, priest?
Pastor, preacher?
The leader of this church.
The leader of this church starts refusing to provide like a gluten-free host for this member of the church. And, church members are quitting and the choir is disbanding. And
the choir is protesting by turning their backs during the service because they aren't allowed to have the gluten-free Eucharist anymore. This is the kind of story that when we came up with having a bread-themed issue that is kind of flirting with this idea of religion, like I dreamed. I never thought we would find something like this.
It's like the platonic ideal of a cake zine story because it's like so niche and random and juicy and wild. And Jordan Kistner writes about it with like such flair as she always does. And it's just, it's you're just dropped into this like strange community debacle that is really, really delightful to read about.
Yeah, and the bread or the Eucharist and the gluten-free nature of it is kind of this larger metaphor for the way that tradition is being embraced or stepped aside from by like members of the church. Like it really connects on all of this larger level, which I think is always the hope whenever we're working on an issue, is that it's about the bread, but it's about more than the bread.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, she's like referencing like the art historical canon and like, like depictions of the loaf and Jesus with the loaf at the Last Supper. And like, is it brioche? Is it a leavened bread? Is it a non-leavened bread? Like, what does it mean to have like The Power of Transubstantiation. I also love Dana Evans' piece a lot, which is about the baker's body. And she is someone who's like worked in kitchens for a long time and now has her own bakery in Philly called Downtime. That's really amazing, and I've been wanting to check out. But, you know, she writes about how physically taxing and demanding, you know, making bread and doing like really repetitive actions, which is what it means to be working in production in a kitchen, are on like your physical form, and that, you know, she sort of interrogates and explores what it means to not have a retirement plan and how to reconcile your relationship to your physical body as a baker with the craft that you love that is also maybe taking its own toll.
Yeah, I really like that story as well. And I think it hits on something that we really try to do with Cake Zine, which is to be a platform, like not just for people who would consider themselves to be like only writers, but for bakers. And obviously Dana has written for Eater and other publications for a long time, but she's not really coming to the piece from the perspective of someone in food media. She's coming to the piece from the perspective of a bread baker and interviewing people who've been baking bread their entire lives who are trying to figure out like how they can keep doing that into the future. And I think especially as people who buy fancy loaves of sourdough in big cities and you look at the price tag, like thinking about how much labor and like physical effort just goes into those loaves is a really like nice side effect of reading that piece.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I mean, the carpal tunnel at the beginning is all too real.
Yeah.
The trying to force like the too cold frangipane out of a pastry bag, which is, you know, something I'm doing all the time. It just really hit home.
Yeah, I hope you're stretching more after reading that piece.
Yeah, I got the squishy mats. Compression socks was honestly one of the revelations of the piece for me.
I'm pro compression sock. I think really we could talk all day about our favorites, and I want to talk about
I want to know what yours are.
I know, I'm trying to avoid it.
Please.
Okay, one piece that I really enjoy is we published a translation in this issue, which was new for us. It's an essay by Danielle Saldana Paris, which is called, it's in Spanish originally, so Un bolillo para el susto, or A bolillo for the fright. And it's about this tradition in Mexico City of after an earthquake happens, people go to the panaderias and they buy bolillo, which is this kind of like oblong-shaped sandwich bread. And he's talking about how bread in general became introduced in Mexico, like after a period of French colonization. Obviously, Mexico had a much deeper maíz and like tortilla tradition like prior to that. And the way that after this introduction, like bread has become so much a part of Mexican cuisine and culture to the point that it is the default thing to go eat after you experience an earthquake.
Yeah, I love this idea that it like eases emotional distress. This like high caloric snack, like the combination of like wheat from the bread and then like the tamal, the corn, and this sort of like merging of the two traditions. And I just love the idea that like bread is a balm as a salve.
Yeah, and that these bakers the first thing they're doing after they're feeling an earthquake is getting ready for people to come in and buy bags of bread to bring back to their friends and family.
Good
like
for
that
business.
You feel the earthquake and someone out there is like shaking a building back and forth to get people to come into their bakery.
Crazy marketing tactic.
But I love getting to read about traditions like that. And I think another piece that was special for me is this interview that Nikolaya Rips did with Breadface, which I think if you were online in the 2010s, you maybe encountered this whole viral moment of this woman who would post videos kind of gently face planting into different types of bread.
Gently.
Yeah.
Like there's sometimes like
There's
she's
some
really
force.
smushing her face in there.
She has different levels of force depending
Yes.
on the bread itself. But when this was first a viral moment, there were all of these headlines of people questioning what it meant, if it was performance art, if it was sex work, if it was a combination of the two. And she was just this like anonymous artist and figure who would kind of flirt with and engage with all these interpretations. But I feel like I didn't necessarily get a take from her about what she was trying to do. And so to have the opportunity to have a conversation with her almost 10 years after this moment in time and have her kind of talk about what her intentions were, how she has this relationship with bread facing now. She even is encouraging the writer Nikolaya to go out and find, I think she says like a matcha cream roll would be a good entry-level bread to face plant into. But after reading this, I admit that I still have not bread-faced, but
I was going to ask, have you given it a go?
Well, I haven't because I don't know why. I've been afraid to do it in public, and then in private, it also just feels kind of weirdly like surreptitious, but I really do want to.
I'm curious. I feel like I would have to choose like a very simple loaf because like Unfortunately, I'm acne prone, and I feel like it's not going to
talks
do
about
wonders
that.
for my skin.
She says avoid seeded breads because they're comedogenic. They clog your pores.
Oh, but like a matcha Swiss roll is not? Like cream to the face?
I don't know. You could wash your face off after that, maybe.
Oh my God.
But that's just kind
Maybe
of
that's like the skincare practice that I need.
bread facing.
Yeah, bread facing.
I think it's more about what it does for the soul.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, we should
Bread
talk
taping. That's like the new goodbye Botox, hello bread facing.
Oh my God. It's like a new religion. I want to talk about the recipes in this issue. I think we always have a conversation about like how much we want everything to be strictly adhering to theme versus an interpretation. We have some actual breads in this issue, but we also have kind of larger interpretations. What kinds of recipes are you drawn to in this issue?
They're also different, which is interesting. Like we have a really hearty mix of like savory and sweet. We've got a Filipino sweetbread sandwich on Pan de Sal from See You Soon, which is like a cooking collective that we worked with in the past. And I think this idea of like the play on sweetbreads, which is, you know, obviously like animal innards, like the entrails of an animal, which are very delicious. But, you know, when you're ordering sweetbread at a restaurant, you might not be expecting organ meat necessarily. And that's a recipe I really want to make and I'm excited to taste. And then also Kayla Wong did a cinnamon raisin kyangbing. And I've always loved cinnamon raisin bread so much. And the idea of like making a flaky pastry that also comes together in a few hours. You know, obviously bread, I think for a lot of home bakers can feel really intimidating, especially when you are using sourdough or like, you know, choosing to bypass commercial yeasts. And I think this is an amazing recipe because it's like bringing the pleasures of bread into a new form and, you know, making it really like accessible to the home cook.
Yeah, and I love like that her origin for the recipe is the Pepperidge Farm cinnamon raisin swirl bread that I think a lot of people grew up with, and having that be reinterpreted into a griddled flatbread
Are you
is
down
really
for
fun.
raisins?
Yeah, I mean, I would never order a raisin bagel, but I think raisins have their moments for sure.
Interesting. But you would have like a slice of Pepperidge toast.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
With like butter and flaky salt. Delicious.
Delicious, totally.
Another recipe that I'm really excited to make in the issue is Joao's pão de queijo pancakes with a guava swirl in them. Pão de queijo is something that I really love, but that I'm intimidated to make at home. I think pancakes are just such an approachable and fun thing to do, and especially a savory sweet pancake that has the cheese, obviously, but then this guava swirl just sounds so fun to me.
Pancake night.
Pancake night. And then if it is like the project recipe that people want to do, I think Shilpa's like giant tanga bun is that obvious one. And this is a bun that's stuffed with cardamom and dried cherries and coconut and like all of these mixings. And then it also is iced on top. So it almost feels like it's clearly a bread and a bun, but it feels cake adjacent to me in the fact that it is kind of highly decorative.
Yeah, it's bridging our two worlds.
It is bridging the two worlds. So there's one more recipe in the issue that I want to mention as well. It's the za'atar and olive oil focaccia from Nisreen Shahada. And this is accompanying an interview that June Cho did with Nisreen about her experiences being a dentist living in Gaza and then finding herself in the refugee camp in Rafah with her family and going from having this experience of baking bread kind of as like a side hustle hobby. Like she would be baking for herself and her family and sometimes selling the extras on Instagram to literally cultivating yeast because there isn't enough to grow or to eat anything, and then baking for survival with her family. And then kind of reflecting in this moment that she's at today where she now is in grad school in London and she's baking this za'atar focaccia while being really far from home as a way to connect back to that. I think that's really meaningful to me because I think it gets at this larger point about recipes being time capsules for moments that you've eaten things before or ingredients that connect to your heritage or to your family. And I think it's just really special to get to share that recipe in the issue as well.
Totally.
So if you were going to make this issue again tomorrow, sorry.
Please no.
Please no. If you were going to make this again tomorrow, what is something that we didn't include that you would want to? Because I think we do have there's so much bread to cover that we didn't include.
Right. No, that's very true. I mean, I did sort of want like a eulogy to the bread basket.
At the restaurant?
Yeah. I mean, it's just like the free bread basket. It's like a tongue twister for some reason. Was so iconic and such a like pleasure of dining out, and feels like sort of a bygone era wherein like bread prices are obviously like skyrocketing, and you know, no more free bread. And so I would have been interested in a piece around that. I think also like the Panera bread bowl was something I really like grew up indulging in, loving, being obsessed with. And like I'd be curious about like who's eating a Panera bread bowl now and like where are they? What's happened to them?
Okay, there's actually a Panera a block away from the studio, and I thought about going there for lunch today.
Wait, should we go after this?
We could and go get some bread bowls. I like both of those stories. I would love to publish those. I think another thing that we missed is the gluten-free of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel bad because I think for years now we have been kind of neglecting the gluten-free community. I have friends who are members of this community. They have called us in before. And, you know, I think like in our defense, I think there's probably a whole issue that's specifically talking about
dietary, and maybe not even just gluten-free, but like dietary restrictions more generally.
Yes, but I think I have to shout out, I think great strides have been made in the gluten-free bread ecosystem, evolution, universe. And it would be interesting to kind of speak to that in some kind of way or acknowledge the fact that like bread is this constantly evolving art form and things that we think of as being very essential, such as flour with gluten, like are not necessarily.
Totally. Okay, gluten-free issue next.
Yeah, maybe.
We'll see.
If you're listening right now and you have thoughts about what we should do as our next issue, we are taking those thoughts into consideration. So this episode is coming out in early March. We have a couple of fun things going on about the issue in real life that I want to maybe talk about with you. The first is that we're doing a reading in a church, which is kind of a fantasy of mine.
Why is it a fantasy?
Because churches have the most seating of any venue I can find in New York.
She's so utilitarian, folks.
Because I have planned a lot of events for Cake Zine,
Yeah.
and finding enough seating and folding chairs is really expensive and difficult. And I think a lot of people go to readings and just expect to stand. But it's really nice to provide the opportunity for people to sit down and reflect. And what better place to do that than
at a church?
The Lutheran Church of the Holy Trinity on Central Park West.
With the sweet sounds of Sabrina Carpenter being played on the organ.
Oh, shh.
That's a surprise. Excuse me.
It's a surprise. It's okay. If you're still listening to this podcast, you can know that we have enlisted a secular organ player for this event. But I think obviously considering the religious themes present and also the ample seating available, it just felt like a really fun opportunity to get to like bring in some bakers that we like. And I think the other thing that's fun that maybe we could talk about a little bit is that we're going to do our first like proper restaurant moment.
We are. Yeah, we're doing a pop-up with See You Soon at Rodora at the end of March. So mark your calendars. But we're going to do sort of like an immersive, like bringing the issue to life through bread dinner, which is going to be so much fun.
And you'll do some dessert, right?
I'm going to do some dessert. I don't know what yet. I'm thinking like brioche ice cream could be kind of fun. But we're doing it with See You Soon. And they're the ones who did the sweetbread sandwich recipe. But they're an amazing cooking collective and they're inspired by Vietnamese and Filipino flavors. And we're super excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And we met them just because we happened to be doing a pop-up at Orange in London, the wine bar, for our Tough Cookie issue. And they were in residency there. And now on the other side of the world, we're friends and we get to do something together.
Oh, it's so fun.
So it's so fun.
The real event that I'm manifesting is Cake Zine Community takes Maine Schooner this summer.
Okay, so for context, we published a comic in this issue from somebody named Nathaniel, who is a baker on a working sailboat on the coast of Maine in the summer. And so he's baking all of the bread that people are eating for all of the meals of the day with a wood-burning stove and also like mixing bowls that may or may not be rolling around as the boat is a sail.
It seems dangerous.
Is a sail even the correct?
Probably.
I'm practicing.
On the open seas.
I'm practicing for when we get to go on the sailboat and the only thing we do is speak in like the vocabulary of 100 years ago.
How many knots are we at? Captain?
Captain. But I do love that because if I think baking bread is hard in a normal context, baking bread adrift at sea is just next level.
Next level entirely.
Okay, so before we get into our rapid fire, I want to know if you think about bread differently after working on this issue.
I I do. I mean, I think like I'm more aware of how like robustly integrated it is into the everyday, Like I'm so much more aware of the fact that I'm having toast all the time. And I think like, I think about the import of it as a like symbol of sustenance more. Like I think of Hermione Hobie's piece, which is sort of a deconstruction of the phrase bread and roses by a suffragette. And this idea that like, we need both like sustenance, equality, security, shelter, which is bread. And then we also need like roses too, which is like pleasure and art and education and
Literary food magazines.
Literary food magazines. Keep us afloat, please. What about you?
Yeah, I think it is that kind of phenomenon when once you notice something, it's everywhere. And I think a lot of people just eat bread all of the time. And so it's not that I'm more aware of it in that context, but I think when we were writing the editor's letter, I was thinking a lot about the fact that to me, bread is the most alive baked good.
Mm-hmm.
Like as someone who's made sourdough in the past or even used yeasted bread, there's this moment when you just have ingredients and then you mix them together and you set them aside and you have to wait and notice this change and notice this like proof that life is within this dough before you can finish making it. And then it in turn gives life to you. And I think that just kind of thinking more about the life that exists in all of these ingredients that we're eating and the people whose lives brought it to you, and I think specifically in the context of bread, is something that I have continued to sit with.
Totally.
Okay, you want to do a rapid fire?
I'm ready.
Okay. What you would consider to be the best sandwich of all time?
Oh, God, so hard. Chicken parm.
Oh, that's really good.
Right?
Yeah.
Just like a juicy hoagie. So good.
I was going to say a grilled cheese just because there's really two ingredients in a grilled cheese, which is bread and cheese. So I think it's kind of like uplifting the bread part of a sandwich, but I do like a lot of
What's
sandwiches.
your perfect grilled cheese?
I'm so glad you asked. Like a swirled rye bread or some kind of like darker, nuttier bread. And then I like Swiss cheese. I'll eat American cheese because I know that's what everyone thinks should be in a grilled cheese.
It should be.
I prefer like a paler cheese. And then, yeah, I'll add like kimchi or onions or hot sauce or anything else that I have. But I think at the core, that's kind of all I need.
Interesting. I feel like the elite combination to me is cheddar for flavor and then American for melty goodness.
I'll take that too.
Yeah.
Your favorite, like, quote unquote, quick bread, like a loaf bread.
Like a loaf cake.
Yeah.
Zucchini.
I like pumpkin bread.
Good one.
Your favorite toast?
Cinnamon sugar toast.
I do want to go make that now. I'm going to stick to my PB&J toast.
PB&J toast.
Yeah. Also, okay, avocado toast.
It's good. You can't mess with the classics. It's good.
Yeah.
It's no longer in vogue.
Yeah, I make it at home, and I'm still a fan.
Like just plain avocado.
I mean, like salt.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll do like
an egg. Oh no, not for you.
Not for me.
Yeah.
But I would do like some chili flake or za'atar or something on it. Your go-to bagel order?
I feel like I really have two modes for bagel order. It's like either I'm like hungover and I need like carbs into my blood as soon as possible, and so it's like hash brown, egg, cheese on like an egg bagel when I'm feeling very decadent and naughty. Or if I just like want like a quick snack, like scallion cream cheese on like a sesame bagel.
That's my order.
Oh my God.
Scallion cream cheese.
We have so
on
much
a
in
sesame
common.
Bagel. We do. Lightly toasted. I don't like it when there's too much cream cheese. So I'm in a lifelong pursuit of how I can order my bagel over the phone so that they don't put too much cream cheese.
Can't you just say light cream cheese?
No, if you say light cream cheese, they give you like the half fat cream cheese.
No.
See,
a travesty.
You fall right into the trap.
Yeah.
What I say is, I would please like a sesame bagel toasted with a little bit of scallion cream cheese.
How does that work out for you?
50-50.
50-50.
But
Yeah.
I'll take those odds.
That makes sense.
Okay, final question. A bread item that you would most like to faceplant into a la bread face?
I mean, I think it has to be something really simple again because my skin can't handle much, unfortunately.
Okay.
I was not blessed with the genetics of someone who can like take a like
bread to the
funfetti
face?
cake to the face. I would say like just like a simple sourdough. But ideally sans crust.
I was going to say the sourdough seems crusty and perilous.
It's just the interior.
Oh, the
I've hollowed it out for
your
these
childhood
purposes.
self
Yeah,
has
my
hollowed it
childhood
out.
self is.
Okay, I think a King's Hawaiian roll would feel really good.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's really good.
Final
a Parker
answer.
House roll too.
Yeah,
Too buttery.
we'll workshop it.
Yeah, we'll workshop it.
Tanya, thank you so much for coming into the studio to talk about daily bread with me.
Thanks for having me.
If you're listening and you want to learn even more about bread in its many forms, you can find the issue online at cakescene.com or a stockist near you.
What's up, Aliza? How are you?
I'm good, Matt. I'm ready to talk about three things.
Yeah, let's talk it. What's your first thing?
Well, I was just in LA over the weekend for a quick trip, visiting my family, doing some family things, but I got to, have some food adventures when I was there. The first is that I went to a new smash burger place on the west side called Palms and Patties. So fresh that I couldn't even find the sign on the door, but there was a lot of people waiting inside, so that's how I found myself in the right place. They do really good grass-fed smash burgers, $7 for the burger, which I think is a nice price compared to some other burger places these days. And they do them with an inside-out bun, which I'd actually never had before. Have you had that at Hamburger America or something?
I don't think I'm familiar with an inside-out bun. I'm thinking it's a different texture.
Yeah, they flip the bun. It's a potato bun, but it has the kind of flat side out, and then they griddle it a little bit. So it's almost like a patty melt in terms of the exterior bun. But I thought it was really cool. It was really crispy and kind of lacy in the way that you want a smash burger to be. And it's only been open for a few weeks, so it was fun to kind of check it out.
Patty and Palms?
Palms and Patties.
Palms, what a great name.
Mm-hmm.
Palms and Patties. And is it palm trees, or are you palming the patty, or what's...
Oh, I think it's a palm tree reference, but it is also a palmable patty.
That's what I'm thinking too. I'm thinking you palming it and you're smashing it.
Yeah. It's not too big of a smash burger. I think you could probably get a couple if you wanted.
Yeah.
So what's your first thing?
My first thing is a novel that is, I believe, out in May. It's called Food Person by Adam Roberts. Now, Adam Roberts is somebody who's been on the show. He's behind the Amateur Gourmet and one of, I would call the original food bloggers. He's been doing food writing for over 15 years. And he's a terrific recipe developer. And I love reading his Substack. I subscribe to it. And this is his debut novel. And it is really good. And what I don't want to spoil anything about where this story ends, but picture this. You work at I would say a recipe-driven, newsy or gossipy food website. You're fired from the job and you need money. So what do? Well, you work as a cookbook collaborator with a star, I would say a star of a show that was similar to the OC or maybe Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a big time star, and you're helping that star develop their cookbook. And hijinks ensue and drama ensues. And it goes to some places that I didn't expect it. I think Adam does such a great job in weaving real cookbooks and real cookbook authors into the text. So Sola Whaley, Alison Roman, they make cameos in the book. And it's really cool and he goes back into the history. There's a bookstore that plays a central role in the novel that is a composite of Archestratus and Bonnie Slotnick. There's just incredible detail with cookbook history within the book because the protagonist is a big cookbook collector and recipe head. And I really enjoyed reading this book, and I think I wonder what the folks who are mentioned in it are going to think about it. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, it seems very close to home, so to speak. So I'm interested to check it out.
Yeah. And Adam's going to be on the show in the summer, so I can't wait to do that with him. What's your next thing?
My next thing is also from my LA trip. I got to visit the U.S. location of a boba place that I kind of fell in love with when I was in Taipei. It's called Odd One Out. They have actually 3 locations in L.A., and I think they might be opening more, but I went to their one off of Sawtelle, which is, as you probably know, a big Asian, specifically Japanese, but it's kind of expanded to be Pan-Asian, shopping restaurant district on the west side. I got to try a drink that I had seen in Taiwan, but didn't try on that version, which is their seasonal pistachio drink. They have a couple pistachio, actually, but this was their pistachio iron Buddha, oolong milk tea, which I also tried with my mom, and she was immediately obsessed with it, which I loved. It has this really delicious, creamy pistachio flavor, but it's not too strong. You definitely have the oolong as the primary note still. You get it with their coconut sugar boba, which are really have a nice flavor, and they're perfectly chewy. And then I also had the grapefruit oolong drink that was the first one that I had in Taiwan that I loved.
Grapefruit oolong. That sounds... So was it bitter?
It has just oolong tea and then a little bit of grapefruit juice and then pieces of grapefruit pulp mixed in together. So it's very refreshing. It was almost like the first sip you have is the grapefruit one, and then the pistachio one is almost like the dessert version, although it wasn't too sweet. And And yeah, it tasted basically how I remembered, which was awesome. It was obviously more expensive than when I had it in Taiwan, but totally worth it. And, I hope that they open a New York location so that I don't have to go so far.
Yeah. I love that you're on the boba beat
I mean,
here on the show.
It's perfect. It's a drink and a snack in one.
Totally love that.
What's your next thing?
My next thing is another book. I just started reading it, so that's the caveat. I've not completed it, but it's a memoir from Craig Mott. It's called Things Become Other Things, and Craig has been on the show, and I'm a huge fan of his work. Craig has lived in Japan for over 20 years, and this book is a walking memoir, and it has him walking around the Kii Peninsula and reflecting on his life and this traumatic event that happened as a young man and his friend Brian. And I'm just going to leave it there. I haven't finished it, but Craig is somebody who I've really respected. I read, he does these pop-ups where he'll walk across Japan and file a 3,000 word story every single day of the walk. He'll do it between a week and 3 weeks. And he's an incredible photographer as well. And this book is filled with photos that he's captured on his walks of the Kii Peninsula, on the Usagi route, and these old samurai routes that he has so much he has so much background history on what these routes meant for Japan, and really he's such a observer and just a really funny writer. He's got these turns of phrases that are like pure Craig Mott isms. And Craig and I will be appearing at Rizzoli on May 5th to do a conversation live and a reading, and we'll have more info about that later. But I can't wait to finish this book. It's called Things Become Other Things.
Yeah, I love all of the Matt book recs. It's such a fun era.
I've been enjoying it, and I think we work at Penguin Random House, so why not, talk about books?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about a restaurant for my last one.
Okay, cool.
Which is Kiki's down on Division and Canal on the Lower East Side, which I've been going to for years since I first moved to New York and I was living in that neighborhood. But I just revisited for the first time in a while. And I really think it's such a perfect neighborhood restaurant, especially if you're going on the week, especially in the winter. I think in the summer, when everyone wants to sit outside, it kind of pops off and it can be harder to walk in. But I had no problem doing that earlier in the week. And I think that so many of their foods are just so delicious and comforting and, affordably priced. I really love their moussaka. Also, their roast chicken with lemony potatoes. And then I think not everybody gets dessert there, but their cheesecake is one of my favorites in the city. And I'm a big cheesecake lover. I think that they're mixing some Greek yogurt in potentially because it has that kind of tang and it's a little bit lighter than a classic New York cheesecake. The crust is very thick graham cracker. It's kind of hard to, get your fork through all of it at once. But
that's the best feeling.
Yeah.
You can't get through it in one swipe. You know that you're in for a meal there.
A resistant crust.
Resistant crust.
Yeah. I don't know where that came from.
I like it.
I really like Kiki's, and I think that it's nice to revisit old standbys and know that they still remain, at least to my impression, unchanged.
I'm so happy you bring up a classic restaurant. We speak about so many brand new places, as we should, but to remind folks that there are restaurants like Kiki's out there, and I've been before, and that I'd like to go there now. You've reminded me.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've been recently, but they got a location across the street. I'm trying to remember what was there before, but I think for at least maybe 2 years now, I think after the pandemic, they got the second location. So they have even more seating than before. So you have a better chance of getting a table.
Yeah, it was a tough res for a while, and maybe that's why I didn't go as much. But thanks for the reminder on that.
Yeah. What's your last thing?
My last thing is before we started recording, I was showing you a bunch of photos, and this is a recent trip to Philly, which we're going to have a great episode all about Philly coming up. But outside Philly in Oaks, Pennsylvania, is a place called the American Treasure Tour Museum. And I have to say, I didn't know much about it going in. I didn't want to know. Tamar bought the ticket and said we should just go. All right, what to say about this place? It is a guy. There's an anonymous gentleman who lives in the area, has been collecting American ephemera for over 50 years. The gentleman owns an entire former tire factory, and he stuffed it with American ephemera. What does that mean? Well, we've got a collection of 1,000 Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls. We've got player pianos dating back to the early 20th century. He's got 60 of them just like lining this massive room. He's got, and that's just in the like waiting area before you get on a trolley tour, which lasts about 45 minutes. And you go through this collection and you're traveling through all these old cars and signs from many different eras of America. And popping up includes, the Chuck E. Cheese band, the animatronic band fully functioning. They'll play a little show for you. There's pipe organs everywhere. There's pipe organs playing. I'm not giving it full justice. This is an audio show. This should probably be a video segment because it's incredible to see this collection, Christmas collection. The guy bought a couple Macy's collections, and I think a big part of his strategy is just buying out closing department stores and just taking all the remaining products and stuffing this into the room. But it's not really a room. It's this entire factory. And I was really, really impressed and kind of startled by the scale of it all.
I'm looking at photos right now. I am absolutely dying to go here. I love just the sheer scale of everything that's going on right now. I'm looking at a photo I've never seen this many, like, I don't even know how to say it. They're not life-size M&M because M&Ms are tiny.
They're
the M&M
monster
guys.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a photo right now of like the M&M characters, maybe 3 feet tall. I think they're hollow inside, and then they're sitting next to a giant Ronald McDonald. What did the Chuck E. Cheese band play? Did you recognize it?
Yeah, they played a Huey Lewis number.
Okay.
I can't remember which one, but it was definitely a Huey Lewis number, so it was of that era. There's like full like model airplanes hanging from the ceiling, and I would say it's a version of America that I would say we don't see a lot of. And he's collected like thousands of these pieces. Just go there. It's just outside Philadelphia in Oaks, Pennsylvania, near the King of Prussia Mall. A fun little side trip, I'd say.
Yeah, I hope that they do like a nighttime flashlight tour for Halloween. I think it could get a little spooky.
I think if you're talking about haunted spaces in America, this is definitely up there. Every one of these figurines, I'm like scrolling through my phone right now. Oh, there's an elf phone. There's a whole section of novelty phones.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you come to Taste for recommendations on haunted locations, do we have the 3 things for you?
Do we have it? Well, it was great catching up with you, Aliza.
Yeah, you too. This is Taste is hosted and produced by Matt Rodbard and me, Aliza Abarbanel. The show is edited by lead producer Clayton Gumbert and supervised by Pat Stango, Director of Media Production and Development at Penguin Random House. Thanks to Shalia Harris and the production team at Penguin Random House. Theme music by Steve Rydell, logo and guest illustrations by Ellie Skurzat. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter to keep updated on all cool things in the world of taste.